all the way back in the 80s, when season 23 of Doctor Who was being conceptualised, there was a season that was changed heavily after a cancellation turned break. The opening story was to be a story originally titled Arcade, and retitled The Nightmare Fair. This would have seen the return of the celestial toymaker, Michael Goth's incarnation to be precise. In fact, he was convinced to return for the Toymaker's second outing on television. A story that never was. The story was intended to take place at Blackpool and would have been written by Graham Williams. In fact, scripting stage and shooting dates had been arranged. Unfortunately, the original season was scrapped and was turned into the season-long story Trial of a Time Lord. However, the story lives on in both Novelisation 1989 and audio drama 2009. Today is my review of the Novelisation. Note that this will get into spoilers and scenes from the book, so if you don't like spoilers, please go and buy a book or the audio book, read or listen to it, then return to this video if you like. The story is set, in short, at Blackpool. In long, it tends to jump between the Doctor, the Toymaker, and Perry, who is with Kevin for most of the story. The plot gets more into detail with the setting, but Perry and Kevin tend to run around under the fair for about half the story before they are in the cell with the Doctor for the other half. More than the other half if you count the Doctor. We spend the other parts of the story at the fair, in the arcade, in the Toymaker's office, and in the Toymaker's testing room. At the beginning, a man, who we later learn or is implied to be one of our main characters' brothers, Jeff, is taken into a red light. We then jump to the Doctor and Perry on Blackpool Tower, having a little chat, and then we cut to the Toymaker, who is in his office with his right-hand man, Stefan. He watches the Toymaker and Perry go onto a roller coaster, and the rest of the story is a bit all over the place when it comes to character locations. The Doctor and Perry see a woman looking for a child before the Doctor hears the Toymaker's call again and goes looking for its location with Perry, and which the brother of Jeff, Kevin, follows them. They eventually go to Space Invader and get on the ride, Kevin and Perry being forced together and the Doctor being sent along behind them on another one. The Doctor gets stuck inside the ride and is taken by some people, while Perry and Kevin get off the ride and they are taken under the fair. Eventually Kevin attacks the men that took them and he and Perry run. Meanwhile, the Doctor is eventually placed in a cell, and this is where he spends most of the story. Eventually, the Doctor interacts through tapping, and the Toymaker comes to greet the Doctor, and as him fights this crab spider-like creature who we later learn is called Mechanic by the other cellmates. They were meant to fight, and this was also the creature the Doctor was communicating with through the tapping. Hang on, I've lost my page. I've lost where I am on the script. They were meant to fight, They were meant to fight, but the Doctor tapped the pipe above the cell to interact with him, and the fight didn't happen. Eventually, Kevin is jumped by robot miners, while Perry protects him and eventually leaves him behind to give him he's unconscious. Now, I can't remember whether this scene comes before or after the robot miner lock attack, sorry. I can't remember whether it does, but I think it does. But the Toymaker brings the Doctor to his office, and they have a chat, leading to my favourite scene in the book, which is this. "Is that why you came here?" repeated the Doctor, a terrible suspicion forming in his mind. "And they do so love playing games. All sorts of games." "Have you come for me?" The question was now insistent. "My dear Doctor," the Mandarin swung around, the polite tone of voice now belied by the glint in his eye. The last time we met, you were the victim of your own intellectual conceit, which now seems to have developed into full-blown paranoia. At one time, it's true, I held a passing interest in your peregrinations through time and space. The idea I just squat on this amusing but depressingly backward planet, waiting for you to drop in, is egocentric in the extreme. The Doctor refused to be bluffed. You set up the space-time vortex, he accused quietly. Doctor, replied the Mandarin, fixing him with his eyes and replying just as quietly. I am the space-time vortex. That stopped the Doctor in his tracks. Side note, he accused is the Doctor and the Mandarin is the toy maker, in case you didn't know. It was a scene that could have had real good development in the show about the toy maker creating the time vortex. And if they ever decide to bring the toy maker back, I think it will be an interesting thing to mention, perhaps even a reenactment of the scene, which takes up almost an entire chapter, but then again, it is a book form and actions are in text. Anyway, Perry eventually makes her way through the ride and is reunited with Kevin, and we also find out that Kevin is with the Doctor in the cell. Shortly afterwards, the scene we get the scene of the toy maker talking to Stefan, in which he says, "I cannot become another person, but I can pretend." And so we eventually find out that Kevin with Perry was a manifestation the toy maker created, and Perry is brought to the cell. Eventually the Doctor makes a device, and the three walls lower, a pink cloud morphing creature, a mostly cyborg person, and mechanic, which is the crab spider thing. We don't know what the cloud is called, but the cyborg is called SP. And I can't remember the numbers he said after that in his name, but for the sake of it, we will call him SP. Eventually the toy maker talks to a Japanese man and talks about his video game going into mass production. He tests his game, which is, well, as I imagined, a sort of classic first-person shooter, but is based on what he said in the novel. It's meant to be Space Invaders, so if I go over the book again, I'll envision it that way, and I'll refer to it that way. Anyway, a scientist loses a red and green creature, steps out, grabs the scientist's head, and sends an electrical current and kills him before the toy maker demanifests the creature. The toy maker played the game off screen, and the Doctor is brought to play. He beats the toy maker's high score, but ends up shouting at the toy maker and fails to realise the creature coming out the screen to kill him. He throws Stefan in the creature's line of attack, and it kills him. I assume due to it now attacking the people on the toy maker's side, that is why it attacked the toy maker. The toy maker went unconscious from the electrical current, and a machine mechanic was working on, and Perry had also interrupted the toy maker's mind during the Doctor's game. Anyway, the Doctor releases Perry and Kevin and the others, I assume. Now an invisible barrier was established once the Doctor was put in the cell in the story, and that was controlled by the toy maker's mind, which is turned on and off at will with using his powers. The Doctor does some Doctor stuff to it after extracting it, probably off screen given we don't actually see him do it in the book. But then he goes to the toy maker, who has woken up, and traps him inside the invisible barrier in a cage, in an invisible barrier cage. He then explains the barrier will stay active so long as his mind is active, even when he sleeps. In other words, he's trapped there until he dies, which he won't because he's immortal. Anyway, Jeff and Kevin are reunited, and the Doctor and Perry go to enjoy the rest of the fair so long as they are there. And end. This was my first story with the 6th Doctor and Perry, I will admit, and I do like them very, very much. I do like how the 6th Doctor is prone to technobabble, in which half the time I don't understand what the technobabble he's saying is, but, and I just don't understand what you're saying either, but on Perry's side, I do like she's portrayed in a rather strong way and does stick up for herself, if I remember correctly. Kevin. Oh yes, Kevin. Sorry, it's a funny name. But I did enjoy his character. And his search for his brother throughout the book is very interesting. I didn't mention it in the plot, but he does goes to the police force, for assistance on what happens to his brother, and then after a few weeks they tell him there are no reports of Chinese mandarins or flashing lights in the darkness. And eventually the inspector says he doesn't want to see Kevin in Blackpool after that. Well, at least at the fair, I'm fair. When Kevin does attack the escorters, he does take one of their guns and carries it for the rest of the story until he's in the cell, in which most cases I forgot he had it, but he does shoot it a few times, so that's something with Kevin's character. Finally, the Toymaker and Stefan. I think it's fair to put these two together, given Stefan is basically just does basically what the Toymaker says, and he doesn't challenge him and does instead look up to him. Stefan is the Toymaker's right-hand man and became the Toymaker's servant after losing a game, in which he even stated that was the best time he had ever lost a game. Sorry, I lost my place on the script again. Servant after losing the game, with the rest of the Toymaker's servants, or at least that is my guess, that they also lost games. We know Shardlow lost one of the Toymaker's games, and I've been there for 250 years to serve food and play games. Meanwhile, for the Toymaker, I am so glad Graham Williams understood the Toymaker more than Russell T Davies. He leaves so much unanswered, so you can easily fit the Toymaker's old lore into this story. The thing was with the Doctor's Space Invaders game was that he both won and lost. He beat the Toymaker's skull, but died, so the skull won, but died, so he lost. So I think that's an interesting predicament to put the Toymaker's power worlds into. So I think how it was handled very well. I really like the Toymaker is having servants do the public stuff for him, and the Toymaker, and that is the Toymaker to me. He doesn't seem the type to go out and do his own dirty work. He seems more likely to be in the he likes to seem like work in the shadows. I want to say he seems shy to be out in the open, but I don't quite think that's the right word. Unlike the Giggles Toymaker, where he is notched up to 1 million, and is nothing but a showman with stupid new lore and rules that is not as intelligent as he once was when he's supposed to be his most recent story in his own timeline. Sorry, I rambled a bit there, but the Toymaker is very in character in this story compared with the Michael Goths, and compared to the original, he's very in character compared to the original story, and how he weaves and how Graham Williams weaves, not Graham Williams, how the Toymaker, sorry, how he weaves his actions into games is just so Toymaker to me. He turns his call to the Doctor into a game of hide and seek. It is all just so good for the Toymaker, and it's just all that the Toymaker. It's just all that Toymaker juiciness. We also got to see the Toymaker get angry, which, if you know the Toymaker, is a big feat. He usually only gets as far as annoyed. This isn't all the characters, and Mechanic and SP play such minor roles, and SP's only purpose is to give Mechanic a hand and a few other things while he speaks out exposition about himself. I still like him as a character, and I do think his force will be interesting in the show. I also like Shardlow. He was such a sweet person, and you do feel sorry for him. Again, as I said, this is not all the characters, but there is also not many characters either. I generally really liked Nightmare Fair. I tend to find myself struggling to get through more than 4 chapters in a book, and given this book is very short, it's only 9 chapters, that really helped me get through it. The audiobook is only 4 hours and 19 minutes long, so if you struggle with long books, this may be a book for you, given it isn't that long. However, about half the book is the Doctor in a cell and Perry and Kevin running under Blackpool and the Doctor having chats with the toy maker, but it is done in such a way where you're still hooked. And when we do break from that, or a major change in the story happens, like with the two Kevins, it is usually when the stakes rise. I was generally disappointed with the giggle. I enjoyed it, but I didn't like it. Yes, there is a difference. The Toymaker was so wrong in it, and in fact, he was more of a showman. He was doing his own dirty work, and to top it off was using guns and dancing to Spice Girls. Well, to be fair, the Spice Girls scene was the best scene in this episode, but is still incredibly out of character. Yes, in episode 3 of the original Toymaker story, he does have a dancing stage, but that was for a game, and he forced you to uncontrollably dance on the stage. And he never danced on it. It was Sergeant Rugg, Mrs. Wig, Dodo and Stephen that did dance on it. Anyway, back on track. So then coming to this book, which was in fact the entire reason I came to this book, to see if the Toymaker was right or not. I was very pleased with the Toymaker's character and that he was completely understood and written correctly. I honestly think the giggle would have been done better if it took elements from the Nightmare Fair novel and was more inspired by the original Toymaker story. And side note, when Russell was asked by David Tennant on the commentary for the giggle on if he watched the original Toymaker story or at least the surviving episodes, he said no. And I believe he just read the TARDIS wiki article, called it a day and introduced some new stupid law. That may be wrong on that though. And narrates to Russell T Davies is absolutely great at writing, but I did not like his portrayal of the Toymaker. I'm very sorry. So if you hated the giggle, and especially with the same passion I do, and wanted the Toymaker to be written more in line with his original character and our lore, then do I suggest this book? Yes. It is a great Toymaker story, and it is a shame it was never made, given it is such a good story, but honestly, I don't think the Toymaker should return to the show, not unless he returns to his old lore, and as he always was and has been, an intelligent and strict ruled villain, who bends the rules in ways that could be considered cheating, but in reality, isn't if you think further about it. Now, what would I rate this book? I have to say 10 out of 10. My only issue is how easily the Toymaker is defeated, and that is a very tiny nitpick. If it was to be visualised, it would probably be smaller than the smallest thing in this universe, which is absolutely tiny. It is super easy to get the Toymaker out of the cage he's in. Just wait, he is immortal. The device keeping the invisible barrier existing will deteriorate. It seems to be the cage will be stuck on mode so long as the Toymaker's mind is active, and it seems they can't escape it either. You could teleport out, but it may just follow him and trap him again. But just waiting for it to deteriorate and break the cage to the point where the cage won't work anymore, and the Toymaker is out. Now before I leave this video off, I'd like to compare it to the Big Finish audio drama. The Big Finish audio drama released in 2009 and can be listened to for free on Spotify. I haven't listened to it in full, but it is basically the exact same as some dialogue to explain what's going on, given there is no narrator. And because there is no narrator, you have no idea what is going on without reading the book first, or without being told what's going on by the writers, or someone that has read the book. I suggest reading the book or listening to the audio book of The Nightmare Fair first before listening to the audio drama. And I'm very glad that I did it that way, otherwise I'd have no idea what is happening. If you prefer audio plays, then go to the audio drama, but keep an open mind that you may have no idea what is going on, and I have seen reviews on it, and someone has said they had no idea how the Doctor defeated the Toymaker. I suggest reading the book or listening to the audiobook version of the novelisation first. Side note, the audiobook is unabridged and on Audible. So just stick to the book or go through the book if you want to listen to it. The audio drama, otherwise, you will be completely lost without reading it or having someone that knows what's going on in the story. In the end, The Nightmare Fair is a story lost to time. It is a great story cast aside due to issues on production. We will likely never get a televised version, but we can dream. We can dream. The story may be lost, but not forgotten. The toy maker had abandoned his keening over the fallen Stefan, and as the trio came into the room, he was rising to his feet. The doctor motioned the other two to stay just where they were as he moved towards the toy maker. "I have had millions of years to devise a punishment for you," hissed the toy maker. "I have millions more to inflict it." He raised himself threateningly to his full height. "Time you have, yes, toy maker. Time enough to drive any being mad. But you're no more a threat to anyone." With that, he raised the cylinder in one hand and gave it a sharp twist to one end. There was an audible click as something locked and the toy maker started forward. He stopped abruptly, slamming into an obstruction, an invisible obstruction. The doctor held up the cylinder. "Your own telepathic relay switch for the hollow field which now surrounds you, tuned to your own thought frequency, locked in a loop by the power of your own brain. It will function so long as your brain functions, even when you are asleep, until you are dead." With what seemed like overwhelming fatigue, the Time Lord turned and started for the door. Perry and Kevin preceded him. The toy maker's face grew longer, his eyes staring, as the enormity of his face dawned upon him. His mouth opened and moved in what must have been a tearing scream, a timeless scream, a scream for all eternity. The doctor turned back for one last look, the bleak and unmovable sadness in his eyes. "I detest caging even the wildest beast, toy maker," he announced flatly, unsure if the mandarin could hear him. "But for you, there is no other answer. Goodbye." He turned and left the room, without another backward glance. In the confines of his cell, the toy maker began to desperately explore the tiny limits of his invisible, eternal prison.